New Polity live, coming at you live.
We never do this.
No, we try not to, because usually our thoughts are half-baked. And so,
So we want to have them recorded first.
Exactly. So we want to really look at them. But you got excited about something, and we thought this is a question that people should hear right now. Right now.
Well, you and Josiah and Alex did, and I'm just over here, happy-go-lucky. Now you're forcing me to say things in front of people.
All right, let's do it.
All right, but here's the thing. I got an email last week.
No names.
From somebody that does not have a name.
John No Name.
And
nicknamed John Doe.
Bishop John Doe. And Bishop John Doe said that it seemed like You're My article published in issue 3.1 of New Polity magazine.
So we wrote an article in which we said it's extremely unlikely that Christians should invest in the stock market based on current thought here.
At the very least, that it's a structure of sin, as John Paul II would speak about it. Now, just because something is a structure of sin does not mean that it is something that you cannot ever participate in. Right? Structures are sins, John Paul II teaches us, are societal institutions that make the giving of the gift of oneself to another harder to do. That's what they are.
I feel it. I feel that every day. I feel those structures.
And so what we need to do as Christians is to change these, to build new institutions, to deepen our loves, to redirect our loves, and to build different institutions.
John Paul says at some point that we have to destroy structures of sin.
Yeah. So
just saying, changing could involve some destroying.
Yeah.
Not to put you out on a plank here. So we wrote this article, and what's really great is that it's getting some feedback. We've got a really great rebuttal by Michael Humphreys coming up in our next issue of New Polity magazine. And so the stock market, we're responding to that, obviously. And so the stock market has been on our minds.
Yep. And then we get this email. I get this email. And the accusation is this, that our article seems to contradict the socially responsible investment guidelines for the USCCB, that the USCCB wrote for itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is not so much that they're writing for us. It's, it can be implied that something good enough for them is good enough for us, but it is something that's guiding the USCCB.
We're Catholics here, so we are under the authority of our bishops. They are our teachers and shepherds. And so in November 2021, they publish a guide for responsible investing.
Yep.
And they write it concerning their own investments, because the USCCB has investments. But it's obviously become, within the Catholic world that's speaking about this, a kind of a mile marker, or a landmark for how everyone ought to invest. All Catholics.
Right.
And presumably because all Catholics, all Christians.
Right.
Let's not go down that rabbit hole.
But it's true. The supremacy of the Holy Pontiff, his universal reach has no bounds.
That is not the controversy of the day. So let's get to it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So here's the argument in short, that the church, especially the hierarchy, they give us laity principles that we then apply in our own life. That things like Gaudium et Spes says that the technical matters of the economy are not the things of the hierarchy, but they still are the things of the church. They are for us laity to handle. So they give us principles, we figure out the technicalities, and then apply them. The church tells us don't steal. They never tell us don't take TVs from Target. We are supposed to derive that from the principle of do not steal.
That's right.
That's how it works. Okay.
Unless they're in the dumpster.
But then it wouldn't be stealing.
There you go.
Wow, we just applied a principle.
We did it. We particularized the universal here in Steubenville, Ohio.
So what the beef was in this email? Sorry, all of this, it's tantalizing information from this email.
Got beef.
They said they think that they said that there seems to be a problem, that it seems to contradict, and then they quoted us in the part that they thought was contradicting. And the part was in our article where we said that because when you buy and sell stocks on the market, on the secondary market, in the stock market, your money does not go to the companies that you are, of shares that you are buying. So when I buy a share of Apple, my money does not go to Apple. It goes to the person who last owned the shares. Just like when I buy a house, my money does not go to the builder that built the house. It goes to the last person that owned the house, right?
With you.
So our question, it was a question that we put in this article. It said, can that even be considered investing? Because nothing is being invested in. Nobody is vesting the money. The company is not able to grow and expand its operations directly through my buying of the stock.
Right. And when you talk about various ways that the company can leverage their increased market value, that's how much their shares are being sold for, to potentially make further moves where they could actually increase production or increase the dignity of life for their laborers, which is the point of investment. But our point throughout the article, and it still stands today, is that when you move from real investment in companies to investment through the stock market, what happens is that your investment doesn't actually is not devoted to the expansion of productivity or the dignification of labor, which are the two reasons for investment. You kind of are in this position of really hoping that the company does some various moves to leverage its higher market value in order to increase production, in order to dignify labor, but maybe it won't.
Yeah, maybe it won't. But anyways, this quote though that they quoted back to me didn't even have all that. They just questioned whether or not a company even gets the money that when we buy a stock.
It's like a factual.
It was just a factual thing, and they said that factual thing seemed to contradict the USCCB's investment guidelines. Forget all of the rest of our argument, the real meat of the argument about speculation. It was like a factual thing. I was like, what? That contradicts the USCCB's guidelines? So I turned back to the document, and well, first of all, it doesn't. It doesn't contradict. I don't see that. There certainly does seem to be instances of perhaps some technical confusion that the Council of Bishops have, that they don't really understand the full mechanisms that are happening here. But what's very interesting, in section 3 of this document, I stumbled upon something that you got very excited about, and Josiah got really excited about, and Alex got really excited about. And so I'm now compelled by you to share this.
The boys are excited, and that's a reason to push broadcast. I don't know what you
at least push your friend into some uncomfortable position.
All right, let's go.
So section 3 is about investment strategies that they would have, and the first one is avoid doing harm. It's a good principle. Avoid doing harm. It's not as good as do good, but it's at least a start. Stop doing evil. And there's two ways that the USCCB sees that they can apply this principle of avoiding harm. And the first is refusing to invest in companies whose products and or policies are counter to the values of Catholic moral teaching or statements adopted by the Conference of Bishops.
Okay.
Those are two separate things. Yeah. Notice there's an or.
If you're doing things against Catholic moral teaching and you happen to be a company and you fulfill those two requirements, you're up against the wall.
Sorry, bro. The second is divest from these companies. If these companies are doing bad things, then don't own them. Now, there's a second strategy that they mention, and it is this: actively work for change. This strategy involves actively using the conference's position as shareholder to influence the corporate cultures to shape corporate policies and decisions. And then they quote economic justice for all, which sounds like a really interesting song or something like that. I don't know. And it says this: as part owners, investors must cooperate in shaping the policies of those companies through dialogue with management, through votes at corporate meetings, through the introduction of resolutions, and through participation in investment decisions. Mm-hmm. It should be noted that failure to vote in such situations or assigning proxies to management is effectively counted as a vote for current management and the status quo. So, not voting is not an option. Now, what's really interesting about this is that, first of all, when you are a shareholder and you are voting, you really don't have any power. Say that you are voted, that Apple sends you a note and says, please could you vote on whether or not the directors should accept the new LGBTQ plus policies for the company, and you say yes, they should, then that is, even in a positive stance, not a move of power. Even if the majority of shareholders say yes, you should, it's still only an advisory position of shareholders. Directors can still say no, that does not matter. Gerald Davis, a corporate law prof at the University of Michigan, amongst many other scholars have looked in this has said this as such. I mean, this is just general knowledge. I mean, this is nothing uncomfortable.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't. Not to slow you down.
For the regular, yeah.
You're on the train and it's moving, and I like where it's going.
Yeah.
But it is the case that a lot of people do not seem to know this. Like when I speak with,
I'm just saying, if in the legal
right.
literature, there's no debate around it.
But on a popular level, at least, people very often make the argument that I am going to sort of vote with my shareholder position all of these companies into some kind of Christian moral stance, as opposed to some kind of demonic silly stance.
Well, you don't even have a choice of what you're voting on.
Yeah.
I mean, directors have that ability, and oftentimes there's no like Christian option.
So is it simply
so it's not even that like your vote doesn't have that much power. It's like you don't even have the power to vote on what you're voting on.
So the most that you could say for this is that you have a kind of advisory power, which maybe as a public statement, like if you got a bunch of people together, a bunch of shareholders together, and said, hey, we're really mad about the way that this company is treating its workers, and we make a resolution that the wage should be higher than it is, the minimum wage. Something like that.
Yeah, if you make a big enough stink, because after all, your market value is just about public perception.
But it's not the case that you're causally related in any direct sense to them actually raising the wage. Like at the end of the day, they can decide, you can make it as much stink as you want, and they can say, yeah, no.
Absolutely, and you have just as much power, really, at the end of the day, as a non-shareholder as you do as a shareholder.
Right, because anyone can raise a stink.
Yep.
Right, they often do, I've noticed.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so I'm tracking so far. So basically, there's this argument from the USCCB that's saying, hey, we got a requirement here. That's if we're going to have shares in this company, then we have to actively attempt to change them for the good. And you're saying, okay, initial problem, at least, is that you don't have a lot of direct power, if any, to change a company for the good as shareholder.
That's right.
Okay.
But it gets even worse.
No!
It does.
Here? In Steubenville, Ohio?
It's never gotten worse here. It's pretty much, I mean, this pretty much implies, and this is now a kind of a big question mark that I would like to have answered, that mutual funds are totally off the table.
Okay.
Because in a mutual fund, you are surrendering your ability to vote to the large institutional investors, say Fidelity or BlackRock, or that they are those who are managing the fund. You pay them a management fee, and part of that management fee goes to them being proxy voters. On your behalf.
So then in that case, so if you are in the stock market through a mutual fund, you don't even have pretend power to vote.
No, you've handed that over,
okay.
Right? And this is a big problem why like all these corporations are going woke today, is because BlackRock and State Street they're throwing their weight around to different corporations that they have huge holdings in, and saying you got to be woke adjacent or woke friendly.
Right.
I mean, we're seeing this today. A lot of people are complaining about this today. And how is it that BlackRock has so much power? Well, it's because we have actually handed over our voting rights to them. Since the 1980s, so there's these two great waves in American history when people got into the stock market. Yeah. The first was the 1920s. That happened when during World War I, everybody was being sold government bonds to help the war effort. People liked getting a return on their money. It was nice, and they thought, I can continue this after the war in the stock market. Huge growth in the stock market then. But that growth was nothing compared to the growth in the stock market during the 1980s with the advent of the 401k.
Right.
I mean, that brought up the majority of Americans into the stock market.
Yeah.
And it was the majority of Americans through mutual funds.
Okay. Pause. Time out. Not on the broadcast, boys. Just on Jacob. How is it then that the something like BlackRock? This is a quick aside because I want to get back to the main point. But how is it that someone like BlackRock can have that power if we're saying that shareholders don't have that power to begin with? So it seems like if it's just made up of our power, then how is it that BlackRock is suddenly? Can't they just look at BlackRock's recommendation and say, yeah, no?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's two major answers to it. The first one is that once you have a larger ownership percentage of a company, that company is just going to listen to what you want to do, because if they divest, their stock plummets. That's one. Two, if you have a director on the board, he does have more power than the average shareholder who's not on the board.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. So it does seem like there could be at least a potential path to, like, if you can become as important as BlackRock, having an effective or at least semi-effective voice as shareholder.
That's right. And so this type of ownership is definitely abnormal.
Yeah.
And I mean that in kind of a metaphysical sense, whereas John Paul II says that ownership emerges through your work. Just as God has absolute claim over the world, and for many reasons, but he is image in his own creation, right? Like somehow, and this is what medievals would call like the book of creation, where you can read the book of creation to get to know God more, right? Because somehow his likeness is imaged on the world. So when we take part of the world and we reform it, we transform it through our work, it has some of our likeness on it.
Right.
And that likeness is the beginning of a claim of ownership. John Paul II teaches us. This is Laborem Exercens. Okay, so in that that way of ownership emerges through work, but then it has also responsibility intricately tied to it. Now you have this great example that I love about a dog.
Yeah, because I think the thing that we keep running into is that it's not that there's simply no conceivable possible way in which a Catholic who wants to, what was the word, actively work for change by being a shareholder can theoretically become such a powerful owner, can own such a large amount of the shareholder price that his opinion could really mean a difference in market value, which to a degree that a company is really relying on market value as opposed to production, that's going to be important, right? So there's a possible route here that no one ever really takes. Like Catholics are not actually in this position at all, right? but in order to justify the use or buying and selling stocks, we kind of imagine these theoretical achievements we might make one day.
Right.
Quickest way of saying is that if the Catholics bound together and somehow became a BlackRock, we would be, I guess, as powerful as BlackRock, right. Which is okay, sure, yeah, that's obvious. The point being, though, that there is still something that has changed, which is your point about ownership. It is that now we are affecting companies. We have our influence on companies extrinsically, like from the outside. We're basically in a position of threatening them on the basis of threats to their market value. And this is the way we have something like a previous ownership that we no longer had, which is ownership on the basis of labor, right? And on the basis of actual investment. So you risk yourself with this company. Yeah. Okay. So
and marry yourself to it.
Yeah. And the argument that I like to make, because it can be kind of, I think it can be kind of confusing sometimes. It's basically like if you have the thing about the ownership that comes with owning stocks is that it doesn't involve responsibility intrinsically.
Right.
It doesn't even involve it necessarily. I would say it involves responsibility extrinsically and contingently. Okay, and this is what I mean.
I want to hear about the dog.
Okay, all right.
Say you had a dog.
So normally you have a dog, right? And you're responsible for that dog because of that relationship of ownership.
Yeah.
Right? It is your dog.
Yeah.
And so when the dog does something, you don't get to choose whether or not to be responsible, right?
Yeah.
Fido bites someone in the leg, and you have to say, I'm going to go shoot Fido, right?
Yes.
And it's an obligation that comes from the nature of the real ownership.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
So-
that's on you. You failed to train your dog.
Right, you either
You
failed
know?
to train your dog, or maybe it's even something that like was out of your hands. But
Yeah.
the point is, you don't get to choose responsibility.
Yep.
It's similar with like even owning like an object that doesn't move, like a pool or something. If I just let a pool sort of go to waste, and someone says, hey man, it's like you're breeding toxic chemicals in there, you're making super mosquitoes. I can't say like, oh well, I'm not really using it right now, so. You're like, no, you own the thing. It's yours. You have to take care of it. Okay, we all understand this. Now, stock
Well,
ownership.
don't even say that it's that extreme. It's just saying that you're letting it go to waste. You can't use it. It's not harming anybody
Right.
else, but you don't get to enjoy the benefits of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now,
You can't
with
swim.
with stock ownership, it's really interesting, right? Because you own the company. That's what's said, but you do not have to be responsible for it. Right? Responsibility is contingent. You might be responsible. You might not. So, for instance, you have something like the right to vote for board members of the company. Now, do you use that right? You can or you can't. Now, I'm putting aside the fact that it doesn't seem to make a big difference either way, right? But even say it did, say
Yeah.
it made a big difference.
Yeah.
The point is the kind of ownership that accrues with stock ownership is the kind where responsibility can be activated or not activated. It's like, okay, Apple might be using slave labor. Okay, I can vote. I cannot vote.
Yeah.
And my ownership remains the same.
Right.
No one would ever conceive of going up to all of the millions of stock owners who do not exercise their voting rights, who do not exercise any of their rights, who do not write recommendations to the companies in which they're invested. No one would even conceive of going to their houses, kicking their door down and say, hey, you're being irresponsible with your company, man. It's out there doing stuff, and you haven't voted in 6 years. You don't even know that you can vote. Get out here, and then just beat him on the head. I mean, it's not conceivable because it's not the way people conceive of stock ownership, right?
Yep.
So the point is that what I would say, it seems to me, if someone said that, say about their dog, here's the dog.
Yeah.
I don't know where the dog is. I own it, but I'm not responsible for it. I
Right.
would say, no. Responsibility is a constitutive part of ownership. And if you are not responsible for it, except for extrinsically and contingently, then you don't really own the dog.
Yeah.
Which is what we're basically saying about stock ownership. It's like, okay, you say you have stock ownership, so let's test it. Are you responsible? In a sense, you are responsible, but only contingently, right? And
The legal literature on this actually says that there's a real separation between ownership and control. That's how it's talked about and universally accepted.
yeah.
And for the Catholic tradition, that's just not possible.
Okay, so let's end it with this USCCB document.
But this is what the USCCB is saying, where it's like you actually have to, like, this divorce between ownership and control, or ownership and responsibility, is just not okay.
Yeah, I want to.
We're just totally on par with this, but this seems to have huge implications because there's some kind of technical questions. It's like, this does seem to
Right. So
outlaw mutual funds.
yeah,
for
like
instance.
it would be illegal to take part in a mutual fund. That does seem like it would.
You
be
have to
the
do
case.
a debate with Deborah Savage right now, by the way, don't you?
So no, not with Deborah. So let's just finish this up, okay? Because part 3, I just want to point to 2 things.
Okay.
So we're going to read it one more time just to leave people with this question. It says that from these principles of stewardship, we've got 2 strategies, okay? And when it talks about the strategies of investment, it uses the language of require.
Well, there's more, but yeah, promote the common good. There's
Right.
another- yeah.
Okay, I see. Yes. But the language is require, right? So we must do this. These aren't like, nice things we can do. So when we say avoid doing harm, it's not saying like that's a nice strategy. It's saying like you are required to avoid doing harm.
It literally says you're required.
Yes, and in the same sense,
this will require the conference too.
Right, and in the same sense, you're required to, where is it? Flip. You're required to actively work for change. This is a requirement.
Yeah.
Now, within how we actively work for change, it quotes another imperative, namely, as part owners, investors must cooperate in shaping the policies of those companies through dialogue with management, through votes at corporate meetings, through the introduction of resolutions, and through participation in investment decisions, all of which, this is me speaking now, I'm not quoting anymore, all of those things are not possible from a person who owns a stock through a mutual fund. Mm-hmm. So he cannot fulfill the requirements that the USCCB has laid out for themselves if he's investing in companies through mutual funds. This is what seems to follow, right? Otherwise, you're going to have to make a counter argument that says, no, you can have your stocks in mutual funds and yet successfully shape the policies of those companies through dialogue with management, vote at corporate meetings, introduce resolutions, and participate in investment decisions. Because the USCCB has been very clear. If you say, hey, sorry, man, I just can't really do this in my particular situation, but that must be morally okay, right? It says no. Should be noted, failure to vote in such situations or assigning proxies to management is effectively counted as a vote for current management in the status quo. What else is a mutual fund but assigning a proxy to management?
Well,
Am I wrong?
yeah, no, no, you're right. I mean, I think somebody might be able to find a mutual fund in which you can still vote.
Okay, gotcha.
But that would just be an exception to prove the rule.
Well, at the very least, what we have here is a stock market that in its current reality, now, of course, there's lots of changes that we can recommend, and we're all about, let's
The
hear
other
it.
thing that we could say, too, about all this is that they never specify publicly traded companies.
That's true.
And that all of this makes a lot of more sense if it's privately traded companies. But I wouldn't say that was their intention. But I think if you're just considering the technical aspects of investing, this all applies a lot better to the private companies rather than the secondary markets.
Okay, so we leave you with the question. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay, so we want to know how do we jive with the ways that the USCCB is telling us this is how you invest responsibly, and the ways in which the use of mutual funds and potentially stock ownership as such,
as a whole,
seems to take away our ability to meet the demands of our bishops.
Great question.
That's my question. Peace.